church bells.
And the church. Yeah, there we go. That's all we need.
All right. We'll call it good. Maybe that doesn't have to be on. Okay. Okay. Oh, so we're down to 11.
Mm-hmm.
Is it 11 or 12?
No, there's
11.
Okay.
It looks like it was renumerated, but then they forgot. No, 11. 11. It looks like 2 cancels. 11 is my favorite number. Must be a good sign. Okay. All right. Let's see. Who do we have here? Hi. It's nice to see you this morning. Hello, Ms. Vang. It looks like we are here. Mr. Tao was here at 5:30, so he won the prize.
Yeehaw! I know y'all jealous.
And he
Yeah,
called
you
me.
even beat me.
He scared me.
No, I was just super excited about the budget, you know.
Woo! Okay, well, it looks like we have a full house. So we are going to call the St. Paul City Council budget hearing meeting to order. And just a quick reminder of what's in front of us here tonight. 2 years ago at our required truth and taxation hearing, we got a message loud and clear that the public felt that its opportunity to weigh into our budget hearing came far too late in the process to make a meaningful impact. I mean, by the time that December rolls around, we are very far into budget negotiations and, just understanding the complexities of what one cut or one addition means. But also the truth and taxation hearing is something that's required under the state statutes, and it's actually nothing that we probably would choose to do anyway. So we took matters into our own hands and started a new process of inviting the public to weigh in on the budget early, right after the mayor makes his budget address. And then in addition to that, we invite the public to participate all the way along the way. We heard a budget address last week, and even after our first budget meetings, I think we're learning more about what this budget's about and the painful cuts that we're looking at. And so we do encourage people, in addition to watching this public hearing, learning about our budget process, to remain in contact with your council member, with the entire St. Paul City Council and the mayor's office as we go through the budget process, so that we can hear your thoughts as we go through a very unusual budget year in this pandemic. So tonight we have a presentation by Budget Officer Susan Earle from the Office of Financial Services. Our Chief Budget Officer, Holly Houston, will be presenting the City Council's budget process for 2020, for the 2021 budget. And so we'll talk about that for a moment, and then we'll go to our public hearing. It looks like we have 11 people who've signed up today, and we'll let Ms. Houston delve into that list a bit more and about our process for intaking information. So just so people have kind of a sense of the lay of the land. So we're excited to hear from our community members, and we're excited to hear from Ms. Earle and Ms. Houston about this year's budget and our process in front of us. So I'll turn things over to, I believe, Ms. Earle first, or Ms. Earle, and then we'll go to Ms. Houston. So thank you so much for being here, Susan. We're ready for the budget, the 30,000-foot budget presentation. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Let me just get my presentation up and I'll get my screen shared to you all. Oops. Actually, Sorry, get my other screen. Y'all don't need my notes as well, right?
That's the terrifying thing when you share your screen. It's like, what's going to pop
It's
up?
not the right screen, yes. So now you all, so if,
Yep.
Council President Ramon, hopefully that looks right, and it's just the presentation. Great. I will do my best to go as slow as possible. If if folks have questions or want me to stop and explain anything, please let me know. I think it's probably it's hard for me to gauge the room if there are others on the call who aren't, who might need something. So if you think there's something that, the public or constituents who are on the call would be helpful to hear a little bit more, feel free to stop me anytime.
Ms. Earl, just so you know, the participants in the public hearing will come on the line after you're done with your presentation.
Got it.
So now the room is essentially the council members, some staff members, and then this is recorded so that it will be shared for the public. So
Okay.
I would just think the presentation is like you're a TV star.
Got it. Thanks. That's super helpful. I'll jump in then. So first, wanted to start with a little context for the 2021 proposed budget. We are looking at a 1.5% decrease in total spending across all funds, so between our general fund, special fund, and debt funds combined. And then within the general fund, which is what most of the presentation tonight is going to focus on, about a 2.5% reduction from 2020 to the 2021 mayor's proposed budget. Also, just a little context to sort of set where we land with our budget every year and sort of what the drivers are of our budget each year in St. Paul. Over just about 80% of our general fund spending is salaries and fringes. So for the people that deliver the services to residents in St. Paul, that accounts for the majority of our spending in the general fund. And this isn't atypical. It's around 80% every year. Of that, another slice looking at this, emergency response accounts for a large portion of that well. So largely police and fire account for over half of our budget in the general fund. And then you can see where the other categories land in terms of the spending for the general fund for the city. Taking a look at revenues quickly, just to get a sort of lay of the land of what the major revenue categories are. Property taxes make up the bulk of our revenue in the general fund. And then local government aid is about 21.4% in the proposed budget, and that makes up a significant portion as well and a really important portion of our budget. That funding comes from the state through a set formula and statute and is intended to sort of level the playing field among municipalities and make sure a base level of service can be provided to all cities across Minnesota, regardless of the property tax capacity that a city might have.
And Ms. Earl, before you move on, how does St. Paul fare in that formula? You want to talk a little bit about, you said so that it was fairly distributed.
Sure. That Council President Brenwell, that's a great question. I think I'll answer that in about 2 slides.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a high-level kind of summary of how the formula works. It essentially, in state law, there's a calculation to figure out what a city needs, and then a calculation to figure out what that city can afford using their own tax capacity, and that we come up with a number called unmet need. The unmet need is what, as the formula would say, we should be getting. And I think Council President Brenmone, to your question, we in St. Paul have we have the largest unmet need, or gap between our unmet need and our actual allocation. So we're about just over $35 million of a gap between what the formula would calculate. So that's this number, this 106, is what the state law would calculate as our need in order to fully account for the spreading of the needs and keeping municipalities, being able to fund critical services. And then this is the actual allocation that we get. So in state law, in the statute, and the appropriations, LGA is not fully funded, or there isn't enough money to fully distribute all of the unmet need that would be calculated in state law. And so this is how we fare overall. There are several cities that have a gap between their unmet need as calculated, and their aid amount, and ours happens to be the largest, and it's about $35 million projected for 2021. Council President Brett, does that answer your question, or is there more I can add on LGA before we move on to the 2021 budget?
No, I think it's very helpful. The one piece that was an earlier slide that I don't, we don't need to go back to, but a lot of times in our budget hearings, we hear people say that the police make up a third of the city's budget because they're 31% of our general fund goes to the police department. Could you just talk a little bit about special fund versus general fund and put that into a little bit more context? Because I don't know if that's correct. That the assumption that because of what the general fund breakdown is that that translates to our overall city budget.
Sure. Maybe I will just jump back so I've got a visual in front of me to talk about it. This is just kind of gives a breakdown of what our general fund is. $319.5 million in 2021 proposed, but we also do have special funds and debt. So you can see the general fund's about half of what we talk about as our full city budget. So the police department makes up a third of this bucket. Within the other special funds, the police department doesn't have as heavy of a presence in special funds as other departments do. Public Works, for example, has a lot of spending in the special fund bucket. So in terms of an overall, I don't have that breakdown in the presentation tonight, but you're right, 31% really refers to, or a third of the budget refers to just this general fund portion. It'd be a different number if we were looking at our total budget.
And local government aid, does that fall into the special funds bucket?
No, local government aid is included in our general fund budget. So that comes in as one of the general fund revenues that funds our overall city, general city operations.
Okay. And I use the police department as an example. I think, if we were looking at just as a special fund, to your point, you would see that Public Works is the big taker on that, but they're generating that special fund. We've tried to look at these like as an overlay or side by side, and it's complicated, but I just think it's worth pointing out that there's that the general fund, which includes local government aid, is about half of our total city budget. And that special fund and debt fund make up the other portion. So,
yep. Council President Brennan, that's exactly right. And this, so you're right. The percentages that are shown on the screen now would all be different looking at the citywide. If this is just the general fund, so all of them would be different once we, if we accounted put the debt and the special funds into this pie chart as well.
Yep. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions on LGA for now, I can move ahead to the proposed budget gap and then our proposed solution.
Council President, I have a clarification.
Yep, Mr. Tao has a question. Yep.
Thank you, Council President. I was just wondering if can you help clarify the transfer and other financing? What is that? The pie chart? Transfer, yeah. The other one.
Sorry. The revenue side. This council,
right there.
Councilmember Tao and Council President Brenmoen. Transfers and other financing is, I think it's largely what it sounds like. Most of them are transfers from other funds that come into the general fund as a financing source. An example I can think of is there are transfers that come in to pay for some administrative functions related to street maintenance and what used to be the Public Works right-of-way program. That's been split into two funds. And so some of the support for that work is rightfully accounted for in the special fund that pays for the street maintenance service program, but all of those folks are paid for out of the general fund. So there's a transfer in that pays for some of that work. Others are, one-time transfers or one-time projects that are maybe funded by another source that come into the general fund. And then it's really everything that doesn't fall into these other larger categories of revenue.
Follow up to that is that has it been pretty consistent in that fund, but at around 11% from other years?
Council President Brennan and Councilmember Tao, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm happy to follow up and get a history of where that transfers and other financing number has been in the past.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right,
Great.
free to move on.
Great, thank you. So our 2021 budget gap, we had a $19.6 million budget gap this year to face. That is made up of a couple components that I'll quickly run through. First is 2020 personnel tails, and so these are for contracts that were implemented in a partial year in 2020. And so we need to account for that full cost of a contract for a full year in the 2021 budget. So in 2020, we balanced with contracts that were delayed in terms of their implementation dates. And then this just recognizes that we need to fully fund a whole year of those contracts in 2021. The next, the other box includes other planned spending changes. And so these are for things like Ford, needs for the Ford site. We shifted due to the school's decision to take SROs out of the schools and not continue with that contract. We had officers that were paid for in a special fund come into the general fund. And then there's also some one-time offsets between one-time spending and revenues that come out every year as things that were only intended to be in 2020. And so this is the net of all of those types of adjustments. After that, we have our debt. And so this is, we move levy from our general fund over to our debt levy in order to be sure we have enough to cover our debt obligations in that fund. The yellow box is the benefit growth. This accounts for fringe costs, largely healthcare increases in 2021 versus 2020, and then also some work comp increases. But by far the biggest is our revenue losses that we're projecting. This was our initial net revenue losses that we had projected in 2021. Not all of the revenue changes are COVID related, but the magnitude of the revenue loss and the big components are due to impacts on our revenues thanks to COVID, the social distancing requirements, and the other economic impacts that have we were all experiencing given the pandemic. So then headed into our solutions for the 2021 budget, how to balance that out. I think I mentioned last week, we've got a few more categories than typical in order to solve this year's budget gap. We did get an increase in the LGA, our LGA allocation based on the formula and state law. And so that contributed $1.7 million. We had other citywide solutions like use of fund balance and some other changes that we could make in order to reduce the spending in the general fund in 2021. We're anticipating a sale of Fire Station 51, which will bring in $1.4 million. We're shifting costs, eligible capital costs for mill and overlay, paying for those with capital, with bonds in 2021. They're typically general fund funded, so moving those costs to a different funding source for 2021. The biggest portion in here, again, is department solutions. And so these are reductions that I'll get into a little more detail in coming slides. We backed off a little bit of the debt levy change that we made in the base in order to bring a little more levy back to the general fund. And then we did, we continue to monitor revenues. Things, as you can imagine, change pretty rapidly given the current situation. And so we were able to update our revenue assumptions to bring down that revenue loss assumption a little bit in order to, that's sort of the last piece on this chart and of what the gap solution is. That solves, as you can see, over $19.6 million. And so there are a couple reinvestments or new investments that the mayor wanted to make and is included in the budget. And I'll have a quick highlight of those in the upcoming slides as well. So headed into the 2021 budget, I think the mayor's, we've all heard this from the mayor, the sort of the key aspects of the 2021 budget proposal, no property tax levy increase, no city staff layoffs, and no use of emergency reserves are assumed in this budget. In terms of revenue, this is the net revenue loss in the general fund 2020 versus 2021. This slide here gives some highlights of where we are expecting reductions in revenue. This isn't all encompassing, but these are sort of the major components of the reductions that we're seeing and the impacts that we're expecting. Again, most of these largely due to the pandemic or the economic impacts of the pandemic. I won't go through all of them unless folks have questions. One thing I would just want to clarify, because it could be confusing. I just said there was no change to property taxes. We aren't changing the levy. What this is, this 1.6 million represents is that we are assuming there'll be a higher delinquency rate or non-payment rate for our property taxes, given the current situation. We saw that happen during the last economic downturn. And so this just means we'll have less financing coming in 2021, but the levy amount is unchanged.
Ms. Prince has a question.
Ms. Earl, for this audience, I think it's also important for us to point out that while the recommendation is not to increase the levy, that people's taxes are based on their property values. So if their property value has gone up, they will see an increase in their taxes, but it is not an additional tax from the city. And maybe there's a better way to say that, but if you could just point that out, because I think it's confusing to people when they receive their tax statements.
Council President Brennan and Councilmember Prince, that's a great point, and it's absolutely right. The levy is one component of what an individual property's tax bill will be. The other component, as you mentioned, is value, is your valuation. And that one really is a function of not only what your value is doing, but what everyone else's value is doing. So just to add another layer of complexity to that discussion for property taxpayers, I do have a slide about what a typical home and we see on a median home and what the impact is. And then also later in the presentation, a website that folks can go to kind of get a sense of looking at their own property, what the change they can expect on the city taxes side would be given where the levy is and what's happening with property values across St. Paul. But you're absolutely right. The levy is one component. Your value and then everyone else's valuation are the other two big drivers of whether or not you'll see a property tax increase or decrease year over year.
Thank you.
So I'll go very quickly to department budget solutions, just to get a sense of what was in that big bucket of solutions that departments have brought forward. Public safety has about $1.2 million of spending reductions. So this is between the police and fire department. I won't read everything on here. I think if there are questions, I'm happy to pause and see if folks have questions. But the main points are really on the police side, a reduction of vacant FTEs, and then an increased attrition assumption. And then also in the fire department, again, reductions of vacant FTEs, and then some other changes in mental health contracts. The other thing I'll note is that the numbers that are shown in the blue boxes are the change from from 2020 adopted into 2021. And so what I've highlighted here are some of the changes in the reductions, but in some of the base budgets, police and fire being the big drivers of those contract changes and those tails that we talked about earlier, those are also included in these net numbers. So this shows you a 2020 to 2021 change for all the departments. Headed to Parks and Libraries solutions, we're noting $1.4 million of solutions for the public libraries, and then 1.3 for Parks and Rec. Again, the libraries got a lot of vacant positions that they're continuing to hold vacant and are taken out of the 2021 budget. The parks changes are across a variety of service areas that you can see here. Again, a lot of vacant positions and then some programming changes that they're anticipating in 2021, and also changes on the revenue side to the voluntary donation ask at Como, and increasing the operating support from Como Friends. Typically, I'll jump back to the slide, went a little quick. Typically, we don't, in this presentation, I don't usually highlight internal service funds or internal service departments, but across all departments this year, we saw a lot of budget reductions and some impacts to not just the larger departments, but also some significant reductions in our internal facing departments. So a reduction in the department, it's Office of Financial Services for just under $400,000. This again is a lot of vacant positions being taken out of the budget. HR, same thing. Vacant positions. So you can kind of see the theme and the way that we were able to avoid layoffs is really looking hard at vacant positions and departments really bringing that forward as a budget solution. Same thing in the Human Rights and Economic Opportunity Department, Office of Technology, and also City Attorney. They also are shifting in the City Attorney's office where some employees are paid for in order to move them off the general fund into a special fund. And then finally, looking at the solutions briefly for Public Works and DSI, same thing, a reduction of 5.7 FTEs, also just service level reductions across various divisions, and then a smaller mill and overlay program. Also DSI, again, vacant positions, and some other changes to their costs and an increase in elevator inspector fees is what's included in their solution, their portion of the budget solution. I know I went through that fast. I want to make sure I'm not taking up too much of your time tonight, but if there are any questions on that, I'm happy to jump back, or I can head on to investments.
Looks like you're clear.
Great. The last thing I'll highlight on the spending side in the general fund, a few areas of investment. Office of Technology and Communications, it has a just over $668,000 investment into frontline customer-facing technology solutions. I think we're all living the reality of needing technology support and living in a world where that's really critical. And so the mayor's proposed budget makes investments in that area. The libraries have proposed to bring cultural liaisons that were funded in special funds or other one-time sources into the general fund, and then also make a mobile hotspot investment permanent with the $270,000. And then the Parks Department, as part of the Community First Public Safety, has an Awakenings intervention program that's prioritized and funded in the 2021 budget. This is the only slide I have on capital. I think, again, Council President Brennan, to your point earlier about different funds and different types of funding, this presentation was focused on the general fund, but I just wanted to make sure folks were aware that we do also have a capital budget that's separate from all the other information I've shown tonight, and that's the proposed budget is $67.35 million, and this is for the longer term infrastructure investments in the city. And so that's another component of the city's budget that's before the council for consideration as we head into final adoption in December. And then the last slide I will talk about before I get to budget and property tax resources. Just wanted to highlight, and I think Ms. Houston will cover this too, so I'll be very brief on the fees on a typical home. But in addition to property taxes, we know that there are other fees and other bills that folks get from the city. And so we take this look every year to say, not just at the property taxes, but across the city, what is the impact of the budget on a typical home? This year, a typical home will have seen an increase in their value, but a net decrease in their property taxes, this $19 reduction, which I think also gets to Ms. Prince's, or excuse me, Council Member Prince's point, about that the levy is one component of what drives your property taxes, but also what's happening to other values, and your value can sometimes have a counterintuitive impact on what your tax bill will be. This itemizes out some other changes that are proposed in the budget, and we get to a net change of $6 for a typical median home that we track year over year.
And I just would like to interject that when we have these conversations about taxes, we're always looking at, keeping taxes down and how are we spending, and very focused on, sort of like the increase in spending and the need to keep taxes low. But I also think that it's important to remind ourselves that an increase in the median value of homes in the city of St. Paul is overall a very good thing. Of course, it doesn't really come to you in cash until you sell your property. But if our homes were losing value, that would be a bad sign. And the fact that homes are gaining value shows that people want to live here and there's a demand. And that these homes, as we know, are at a premium and the prices are going up. So there's always that push-pull of where we're we're happy to see a strong market value on homes, also recognizing that that does impact our property tax bills. So that's always a push-pull.
The last thing I have that I'll leave on the slide, and then if folks have questions, is just some resources that we have. I mentioned we've got all of our budget, both current and previous year budget documents online. We have an open budget portal where folks can download our data and get down to really nitty-gritty into the information that we've got in our budget, and kind of play around with different views of the data to really understand if they're, the details of our budget. And then finally, we do have a property tax estimator on our website where folks can go and put in information about their particular home and calculate what the estimated impact would be on their home this year of the 2021 budget. So if there are no other questions, that's the last slide that I have. And hopefully there are, if folks are interested to check out more on the mayor's proposed budget, this is where to go.
And we talked about this when you gave us this presentation at our council meeting, but just a reminder that the property tax estimator is a great tool. It's very easy to use. It shows what the city portion of property taxes are on your bill, which is just one piece of a property tax bill. It will also include the county, will also include the school district, it includes the Met Council and some other charges. So it'll give you a picture of what the budget will look like, or what your property tax bill will look like, but not the full picture. Nevertheless, it's an excellent tool and something, especially last year when we were really uncertain of where the final levy would be, was very helpful. I think with zero, it's a little bit more straightforward this year. Are there other questions for Ms. Earl before we move on to Ms. Houston? Great. And for people who are watching this right now or are watching a recording, we did get this presentation from Ms. Earl at our city council meeting last week. So we have had a chance to see some of this information. So we've had a chance to digest it, but it's a lot to digest. And so feel free. This presentation is attached to our Legistar system, and where you can find where you are finding this recording. And so feel free to take that attachment and take it at your own pace and look through it. The section that we went over rather quickly, where we looked at where we were seeing revenue increases and or spending increases and spending savings in each of the department, is really the work that's before us as a city council for the next few weeks as we comb through each of the departments' budget presentation. And we've had a chance to hear from Public Works and Fire, but the remaining and libraries earlier this week. But we still haven't had the chance to hear from many of the departments. So that is still in front of us. And so I think as what we're recognizing as we learn more about what's being proposed to be cut for 2021, folks may have more questions. And so once again, I encourage people to stay engaged throughout the budget process and ask questions as things unfold for us. So Ms. Earl, thank you once again for a very, straightforward presentation about a very complex, budget. And it's always good to review it, as I've been through this process now 9 times, and every single time I learn something new about our budget. So I really appreciate your work on this, as well as your team's work on this, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
Council President Brendel, Council members, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Great. We will now move on to our Chief Budget Officer, Holly Houston. Holly?
Thank you, Council President and Council members. I will get up my presentation. Nope. Okay, let's see.
There you go.
All right. Okay, good evening, council members. I'm Holly Houston, the Chief Budget Officer for the City Council, and I'm excited to be here tonight to kick off our community engagement process. And I'd just like to thank city staff that are helping us out this evening, and Ms. Earl for also setting the stage. So just tonight, briefly, I'm here to give an overview of the budget process, briefly discuss some of those property tax, the things that affect property taxes, as Council Prince alluded to earlier. And then we'll get into some resources for community members to be engaged in the community process. So the budget process is a multi-step process, and this video helps simplifies it and explains it. It's about 2 minutes long.
And I don't know, Holly, if that's on your screen, but for some reason there's like a pop-up. Let me see if I can move it. I'm seeing the video, but not hearing sound.
Okay. Well, the video is available online, and it will be available in the presentation too. To give a brief overview, the mayor proposes his budget in August, and the city council from August through December has the opportunity to hear from each department and understand what is in that proposed budget. We are reaching out to the community early on in the process to hear their feedback early, so that their feedback can be incorporated into the final adopted budget at the end of December. And I'll go through some key dates a little bit later that will also highlight some of the essential steps in the budget process. So moving on to property taxes. Who determines property taxes? So the state legislature sets the tax policy. So this means that how property taxes are being calculated is set by the state. In order to calculate property taxes, you need two components, as Ms. Earl mentioned, market value and then a levy amount. So in the beginning of the year, the county assessor determines the market value and assigns property classes. And so the market value was assigned January 1st. Estimates go out to property owners March 15th. They have about a month to contact the county assessors if they find that there is an error in their assessment and to get that corrected. And then we're in the process right now where taxing jurisdictions such as the city is determining their levy amount. And what that means is the levy is the amount that will be it's the budget amount of property taxes. And so why do property taxes change? There can be many things impacting property taxes, such as market value changes in your own property, other changes or market value changes in other properties. So there can be a tax shift, legislative changes, or a change in the levy amount. Just the 2021 property tax environment. Overall, the city of St. Paul saw market values increase 8.6% from last year. This is an all-time peak from 2008 was when we peaked out, and we've exceeded that. Significant property tax shifts continue amongst properties across the city of St. Paul. This year, the city had a gain in fiscal disparities based on the state formula. And that means that this will reduce the impact of the city's levy for most property types, primarily shifting the burden of property taxes from local taxpayers. So let me just say that again. So the city's levy for most properties in the city, it reduces okay, sorry. I just want to be clear because I think this is important. So the gain in fiscal disparities will reduce the impact of the city's levy for most properties in the city by shifting a portion of the tax burden from local taxpayers, mostly residential, to commercial and industrial properties throughout the 7-county metro area. So that is a good thing, and that is we'll see the impacts of that in a few slides. And then pay values were established the first of the year. So just setting the stage that pre-COVID pay values were established. However, post-COVID, Market values remain high are strong because of the high demand and low supply. So as Ms. Earl just mentioned this, I think the only thing I'll point out here is that property tax shift of minus 19. That's where we're seeing the shift of property market values in other property classes, as well as the fiscal disparity change. This slide just shows you that the property tax bill is really made up of all taxing jurisdictions, and the city of St. Paul is 30% of that. And so when you pay the portion, 30% of that money goes to St. Paul, and it supports the services outlined in the chart. Moving on to resources. So this is a tentative schedule of when the departments will be presenting in front of the City Council this year. I also encourage people to check out stpaul.gov calendar or stpaul.gov council budget. The most up-to-date calendar will be posted there. And as I mentioned, some key dates. So by state law, the City of St. Paul, the City Council has to set a levy limit by the end of September. This year, the St. Paul City Council will be voting on the levy limit, which is proposed at 0% on September 16th. From now on, most Wednesday mornings, the City Council will be meeting as the Budget Committee and hearing from departments on those changes. Property taxes are estimated, or property tax estimates are mailed out November 15th, so property owners can see what their proposed tax bill will be in the preceding year, in the following year. And then by law, as mentioned, once those estimates are mailed, people have an opportunity to come and discuss the budget or their taxes with the City Council at a public hearing, the Truth in Taxation meeting on December 2nd. And finally, the budget will be, the final vote on the budget will be on December 9th. So as Council President mentioned, we're just kicking off our City Council budget process and our community engagement process. We encourage people to reach out to council members to share their thoughts. And so far, when we had this agenda item, 26 people reached out to us. Of that, we have 11 people speaking tonight. The others have left thoughtful and insightful comments. And these are some of the themes that I heard in those comments. These comments are also shared and posted on the agenda. So public safety, city services like libraries or bike paths, controlling the costs, and housing and homelessness rose to the top. And this is just the beginning. As I mentioned, the City Council is also launching a budget survey this year. So this isn't your only opportunity to provide feedback. The budget survey can be filled out, it can be anonymous, and you can share your feedback on the budget with us that way. You can also reach out to your council member through email, by calling, or you can tune into the meetings that are recorded or live streamed. And as mentioned earlier, all the materials and presentation documents will be attached to the agenda. And these are just some resources, as Susan also had. So we just want to make sure that people have the information that they need when they need it. So all this information will be posted after this meeting. I will pause for questions. I appreciate your time.
Do my colleagues have questions for Ms. Houston? All right, it looks like, Ms. Jalali has a question.
Thank you. I am looking forward to hearing the feedback. So my question is brief, and it's about the survey. The council budget survey link I just went to seems to go to a page that's not a survey. It's just kind of our general roundup. Is there a survey link coming that will come active at that URL, just so we can share it?
Councilmember Jalali, are you the link? You aren't seeing the link on the council budget page, is that correct?
Yeah, I'll follow up offline if that's easier,
Okay.
but I want to make sure folks can get that. I think that's great, and we'll just offer, it's hard to do governance in a pandemic, and we can't gather as usual, so I'd love to share that a lot, and I appreciate us making that resource for the community in this budget cycle.
Thank you, Council President Brenmo, Councilmember Jalali. I'll make sure all those links are working and get them out to you tomorrow. I'll make sure they're working tonight, but I will send out a communication tomorrow to everyone to access. And then I just wanted to mention that survey will stay open until through December. So we will be gathering that. Thank you.
And I appreciate the question, Ms. Jalali. It's obviously that survey is only as good as the participation therein. So it's to the extent that we can share it and that our partners in the city and folks who are engaged in this process share it as well, we'll get better input. So yes, that is very appreciate that clarification. I'm looking and I see that there are no further questions, Ms. Houston. So thank you once again. I really I got a message from Ms. Prince also saying that this is such a good add to our process, and I agree with that. I know that we're really trying to be innovative, and as Ms. Jalali said, even in a pandemic setting, I'm just trying to figure out ways that we can get people in the door to a complicated subject, but that is so important and meaningful to our community members. So I think I appreciate the time and effort that you go to make a presentation that's approachable for our community members. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to shift gears, and we have 11 or maybe 10 people who are going to be testifying before us this evening. And this format is something that we've used a few times, where we have Ms. Mormon and Ms. Vang basically hosting callers as they come in. They will make an introduction. They'll let us know preferred gender pronouns. They will let us, I believe, know what neighborhood the person is from, I believe. And if they're from an organization, and then the person will get between 2 to 3 minutes to speak. We're asking them to gear it towards 2 minutes, but we'll pull the cane at and yank them off the stage at 3 minutes. So I think we'll look at comments in the 2 to 3 minute range, and we're looking forward to hearing what our community members have to say. So I am going to look to Ms. Mormon and Ms. Vang to help us shift gears to our community members.
Good evening, Council President Bren Moen. Dr. Bruce Corey will be the first person testifying before you tonight, and he is ready on the line.
All right. Welcome, Dr. Corey. It's wonderful to have you here. We'll start the timer when you start speaking. Welcome.
Yeah, good evening, Council President Bren Moen, City Council members, Mayor Carter. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on this current budget proposal. There are three pandemic crises that we are facing currently: the pandemic, the Great Depression, and heightened racial tensions. And all of these are having a negative impact on the 60 billion minority economy in Minnesota, which is on the verge of collapse. And you can see that very visibly on University Avenue. And it needs urgent and critical policy attention, both in the short and the long term. So we have to think differently for the next few budget cycles and invest heavily in wealth-building tools such as equity pools, business incubators, maker spaces, land trusts, co-ops, and other tools. Since our investment assets in the HRA are almost depleted, here are some options. The City of St. Paul has allocated $100 million in funds through a special program at the Federal Reserve Bank bond facility. With our congressional delegation, we can change the criteria to allow investments in these wealth creating tools and extend the time to 25 years. The Alana Community Brain Trust is currently engaging with the Federal Reserve on this issue, and we'll be happy to explore this option with the City of St. Paul. Developers can also be asked to contribute 2% of the value of all projects in the city to help fund these wealth creating tools. The city can also leverage every dollar it spends to get community benefit through using local suppliers, workers, and businesses. We also need to loosen restrictions, especially for micro entrepreneurs doing business with the city. And finally, the city can leverage its multi-million dollar deposits in banks to forge partnerships with these banks to invest in our neighborhoods and along all the different opportunity zones that we've already identified as areas of potential investments in low-income areas. So thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts.
2 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Corey. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. We really appreciate your comments, and we will follow up on your recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Council President Brent Moen, council members, the next caller on the line is Ms. Lindsay Martin. From her address on record, it's 191 Sydney Street West.
Welcome, Ms. Martin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Lindsay, we'll start the timer when you start speaking. Thank you for being here tonight.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. As you set out to vote on the 2021 budget, I ask that you consider what consequences cutting 41 officers to the police department will have on our neighbors. During the pre-recorded budget proposal speech from Melvin Carter, elected Representative President Amy Bren-Moen introduced the mayor as her friend. It is with great concern bias has already been presented and we may not have a true representative vote. Respectfully, I'd like Amy Bren-Moen to consider recusing herself from voting on her budget. Melvin Carter refers to the city budget as his budget. As a reminder to the 7 with voting power, the budget is ours. The budget belongs to the city. In the budget speech from Melvin Carter, he said, if it is not in our budget, it is not a reflection of our values. With public safety cuts to our St. Paul Police Department for the 3rd year in a row, this time taking away 41 officers, it is beyond evident public safety is not a value of Melvin Carter. With 81% of violent crime victims being Black, Brown, Asian, and non-white, plus the 23 lives lost this year, we do see that the old mantra the mayor promoted, a safe St. Paul for everyone, had absolutely no value and was just political rhetoric. Melvin Carter has been bragging to news channels that he's been dismantling our police department over the last few years, and those who have voted on public safety budgets during that time are guilty of the same. The 2 years in a row of historic level of crime is visible evidence the police department cannot take another hit, and that the previous public safety budget approaches have been all wrong. As the mayor pats himself on the back for not cutting jobs to city staff and leadership in 2021, 41 officers will indeed be cut from the St. Paul Police Department. The current budget proposal strangles the reform initiatives that our neighbors have been asking for and that are already in place with the St. Paul Police Department. The very same reform initiatives the nation is demanding. We already have it and we're already doing it, but a severely under-resourced police department will create impossible hurdles in fostering these programs. I ask, what is the body count you need to prevent you from dismantling our police department at this time? We know that the 15 people murdered this time last year wasn't enough. So how about a body count of 23 people? Is that enough to motivate you to protect our neighbors with the resources that we need? Because that's how many people that have been murdered this year to date as of this morning.
Thank you for your testimony. And I, in between phone calls, Ms. Mormond and Ms. Bang are calling and bringing folks into the call, so sometimes there'll be a slight delay.
Council President Bren Moen, Dr. Chester O'Gorman from Jessie Street is on the line.
Welcome, Dr. Chester O'Gorman. Thank you for being here this evening. We'll start the timer when you begin your comments. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll begin now. Monique Pellers Doty recently composed a piece called The St. Paul Police Department, A Decade of Disgrace and Review. She highlights a number of damning facts. Among them, several cases of brutality and wrongful arrest where the city has paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars, 38 people killed at the hands of St. Paul Police. Despite efforts to reform, inroads have not been made. The Police Civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission has had 2 resignations last summer, the chair and vice chairwomen. Both cited lack of support from Mayor Carter. In 2018, the city human rights director resigned. According to the Star Tribune, she repeatedly raised concerns that the police were blocking misconduct investigations. But there's a more serious problem than nominally supported oversight committees, their advocacy. Derek Chauvin had 17 misconduct complaints. He remained a cop until he lynched George Floyd. According to Communities United Against Police Brutality, many disciplinary actions are overturned because they are compared to previous cases, making it hard for departments to reverse a history of leniency. We maintain that such reforms cannot address the problems that are endemic to policing. The systemic problem requires a systemic answer. I suggest we listen to the recommendation from BLM co-founder Patrice Cullors, who says the first step is to significantly reduce funding to law enforcement bodies and redirect that money into initiatives directly serving communities, including education, healthcare, and community programming. Another way to free up money for such initiatives is to require police officers to carry private malpractice insurance. Part of the annual budget goes toward paying out for lawsuits and other related fees. Requiring police to carry insurance would relieve the city from these payouts and help rid departments of corrupt officers. I implore you all to begin defunding an antiquated law enforcement with an embarrassingly bloated budget. Last year, it was 33% of the general fund. This year, in the mayor's proposed budget, it appears that percentage has grown. I beseech you all, especially on behalf of our Black and brown brothers and sisters, to continue to bear the brunt of police violence. Thank you.
2 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm done. Okay.
All right. Oh, thank you so much for your testimony.
Good evening. I apologize for the delay. We have the next caller on the line. His name is Mr. Mark Larkins. His address on record is 880 Fairmount Avenue.
Thank you
for allowing me to speak tonight. Dr. Mark Larkins. I'm a neurosurgeon in the Twin Cities. We've lived here for about 24 years, and about 2/3 of that time has been in St. Paul. And part of that, I was the chief of neurosurgery at Regions, so I have a particular interest in trauma, and that was between 2005 and 2011. Since that point, I've been covering level 1 and 2 trauma centers all over the country for neurosurgery. And these are usually pretty stressed out places, and they range from Joliet, Illinois to Fayetteville, North Carolina, Manchester, New Hampshire, to Fresno, California. The thing that they all have in common, in my view, is that there's police departments there. They're sort of on the ropes, and things aren't particularly well done. They're not particularly well funded. And changes are constantly being made, but there's no objectivity to like what the results are from when the budgets are tinkered with. And I'm not trying to degrade what you're doing here, but that it's always, you go to the police meetings and they cite the statistics with the crime, but they never really lay out the objective cost to human beings. And the sense that you get is that these things are becoming more gruesome as time goes on. And it'd be nice to know, with these changes over time, what happens with this? Is there an objective way of assessing how far have we gone? Is there something that can be done differently? How much farther can you go? Because my view is that the safety issue is like the groundwork for the entire society. And then if we can't guarantee that, then any other programs are just superfluous for that. And I think that when you cut in that sector, you really have to try to minimize that. But we have to have some objective tool to measure what exactly is happening as a result of this, because I'm more or less mystified. So I think that my basic take-home message from this is that I listened to the beginning of the program and was impressed with how far everybody went to try to make this work. But I think that coming up with some idea of like, is this really manageable? Are we pushing this to the limit? Is it making it so that we're creating these injuries that are just so terrible that society suffers as a result of that? I think that moving forward, there's got to be some ongoing way of measuring that. I'm not pro or anti-police. I think that safety is paramount, and I think we just have to have some way of assessing what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for your testimony tonight.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Okay. The next person to testify is Ms. Linda Huber. Her pronouns are she, her, hers, and she is on the line now. Ms. Huber.
Oh my gosh. Good evening. Thank you for hearing from me. I wanted to discuss this whole, put my 2 cents in about this whole trash thing. Again, we got tied into a 4-year agreement. They should get tied into a 4-year agreement as to what they can charge to. More people should be able to be involved when the contract is renegotiated because, I have 2 buildings that are 5-plexes right by me that get 1 trash can. And I have to have 3 recycling, so I have 6 trash cans. And if we have to have all of that right now, they should be tied into what the price that they can charge is, and it shouldn't be allowed to be increased because the contract is a contract. We should have known what we were paying for and stuff like that in the beginning even and stuff. And, I just had my rental unit caught on fire, and I just had the fire inspection there. And there was a cord, so I had to just send a picture showing that the cord was moved. And he sent me a text saying that that was fine and it was taken care of and I would get a 6-year license. And now today, because the house was a victim of arson, I got a letter saying that I'm going to have another reinspection on the 25th here, which is a huge waste of just his time and going over there because I don't know what happened. Sending out this letter, all of this stuff. If I get another bill, I'm going to be really upset. You guys should be able to do much better with financing of money and utilizing of people's time. And when you have an agreement of a contract, it should be able to, you pay this much and this is what you get. We got stuck into the 4 years of having to have all them trash cans and everything like that. And so they should be stuck into what they can charge, regardless of what happens with anything. And that's really all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much for your testimony tonight. Thank you for being here.
Council President Bremo and council members, the next caller on the line is Andrea Boyser. The pronoun preference is they, them, and their, and the address on record is 838 University Avenue.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you, Council President. Members of the City Council. Hi, my name is Andrea Boyser, and I'm a proud resident of Ward 1. I speak before you today with a serious concern about the proposed 2021 budget. The decisions that you all make today will truly set the precedent for these uncharted times, which is why I am calling for a more drastic reduction to the police department's budget. Over $100 million is allocated to the police consistently, while our public housing, community development, human services, and libraries are already severely underfunded. More reductions must be made to the police budget. More funding must be allocated towards public housing, our libraries, and help for residents experiencing homelessness. We need substantial change now more than ever. St. Paul's most marginalized residents are counting on you to fund the departments that serve our community. Do not cut funding to health and human services, the library, public housing, and our parks. Cut the police budget more. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much for your testimony this evening.
Council President Brenmoen, there have been a couple of no pickups, and we'll continue to call and chime in a moment when we get someone on the line. Just a moment.
Thank you. This is neither here nor there, but there was a moment where I saw many people on the screen, and now I'm back down to 3. Do other people see many or just 3? 3. 3. Still trying to figure out teams for our meeting.
Are those crickets?
Yay. 4.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Council President Brad Moen, council members, the next caller on the line is Carrie Pomeroy. Her pronoun preference is she, her, and hers. Her address on record is 1687 Minnehaha Avenue West.
Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. I'm speaking on behalf of the Root and Restore St. Paul Coalition. Root and Restore estimates that the proposed general fund budget comes to about $1,100 per St. Paul resident if you break it down. That got us thinking about what we would choose to spend our $1,100 on if we had our chance. When we picture a budget that would really make a pathway for us all, we picture prioritizing safe, affordable housing and healthy food for all, supporting youth and families' ability to thrive through job training, a guaranteed basic income, healthcare, library and internet access, and recreation. We picture supporting small businesses and neighborhood cultural vitality, mental health care that people can access in a crisis without fear of police shooting them or their loved ones. We support Black and Brown-led efforts to meet community needs and heal trauma, such as the Love First initiative. We would prioritize funding for opportunities for people to make meaningful amends when they hurt others, not just go to jail or pay a fine. So we support the Ethos program and think it should continue to be funded as it was last year. We'd also prioritize trusted community mentors and credible messengers who can help youth navigate challenges without arresting or assaulting them. This budget proposes devoting 31.6% of the general fund to the SPPD. That's about $350 of the roughly $1,100 allocated per St. Paul resident, according to our math. So almost 1/3 of our dollars go to a department whose contract makes it exceedingly hard to fire police officers and that consistently resists accountability and transparency and has obstructed groups and people, including members of Root and Restore, in obtaining data that is supposed to be publicly available. So those dollars go to a department that arrests and uses force against Black and Brown people, especially Black and Brown youth, at disproportionate rates. Those dollars feed mass incarceration and perpetuate cycles of trauma, family separation, and violence when we could be nourishing health and well-being in the ways that I mentioned. We dream of prioritizing. So we believe we absolutely have to transition to more life-giving ways to meet needs in our community, to hold one another accountable, to address the systemic harms that are really, have become so clear this year. And we do believe that we as a community can make that transition. So I thank you for the chance to give testimony on behalf of Root and Restore St. Paul.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it so much.
Council President Brad Moen, I have no more callers on the line. I believe Ms. Vang is checking her last caller to see if they're available.
And Ms. Mormon, are we going back and giving folks a second call if they didn't pick up the first time?
And a third call.
Okay. I think I knew that, but just thought I would just double check and make sure.
Yes. Yes, we were trying them several times to make sure and leaving messages.
Council President Bremo and council members, I tried to reach my last caller that was on my list 3 times, but I went to a voicemail box that was full, so I couldn't leave a message. So on my end, with my call list, I completed.
Okay, so Ms. Mormon and Ms. Bang have completed the call list for our testimony tonight. And just a reminder, and something that we've said several times, this public hearing is only one way that we are taking input from our community members, and we encourage people to fill out the survey, which we'll be sharing. We encourage people to call their council members. We encourage them to email, contact council or your council member directly, and just be in touch as we go through this process. Obviously, there's lots of varied opinions on how to move forward, and our job is to navigate those opinions and the information we're given by our departments against a very challenging budget year. So we appreciate the folks who testified tonight, the staff who made it possible. And unless there's been a call in the time being, then I believe that we are at the end of our public hearing. Are there any closing thoughts from my colleagues before we adjourn? We're good? Okay. Well, so it begins. We'll start in earnest with our budget process, engaging the community and working with our departments to come to a levy limit and a final budget in December. So thank you, everybody who participated and helped make this possible tonight. We're adjourned.